Welcome, everybody. It is third. No, it's Friday. It's Friday night. But this still is Attack on the Politicos. It is the NGSC Sports Weekly Political Show. I'm your host, Ralph Garcia. Joined this evening. It's just a duo this evening with the coach. What's going on, Coach?
Not much. Not much.
Yeah, actually, there's much going on.
Not in my life.
Yeah, not mine either, Coach. Nah, you got that right. My life either, but plenty going on. But of course, first let's remember to dry mouth and the website, the updated website, NGSCsports.com, where you catch all of your current content. It's a gigantic slider up top. It gives you all the latest articles. I know on my monitor it's like that's big, so but you can definitely see it. You'll see Sammy Sportface gives us nothing but nebulous March Madness numerical rankings. I edited it, I read it, and I still don't know what the hell it says, but okay. Mike Draculus gives us against all odds. That's his picks on Super Bowl 58.
Crazy.
Number 8, 58. John Doucette, of course, gives us the ACC baseball news and notes. Wake Forest is the preseason favorite. That and a whole bunch more on NGSCsports.com, where we never stop. And, of course, politics. Never stop. Never stop. So, first of all, people, call it whatever makes you feel better. Insurrection, a riot, a hangout gone bad, I don't know, a picnic with a lot of fire, call it whatever the hell you want. Here's what happened January 6th. Before January 6th, people were led to this moment. You don't have something spontaneous that includes shirts that you had to have printed and ordered and shipped and dispersed out, and military gear. That's planned shit. The plan was to stop the electoral count, okay? Not going to beat around the bush. That's what it was for. Otherwise, here's a question. So why did that happen on January 6th? Of all days, of January of 2021, before the 21st of January, why did it happen on January 6th? And why did it happen at the same fucking time as the electoral count, okay? And why did everybody head that way? Coincidence? No. No. I don't care if it was Joe Biden, Donald Trump, Bozo the Clown. I don't care. That was the purpose, was to overthrow. So anyway, we've talked about, Coach, we've talked about, I'll get ready to throw it your way while I share the show around. We talked about the 14th Amendment, Section 3 of the 14th Amendment. And Colorado took it upon themselves. It's a first ruling of its kind, as the Colorado Supreme Court decided that the provision in Section 3 of the 14th Amendment would be applied to Donald Trump, essentially taking him off the ballot. And that went to the Supreme Court. And looks like it went Trump's way, Coach. At least it would appear.
You know, I can see why, Trump would feel pretty good about this. And I know that there's a number of people that I've spoken to that are upset about the way that they see this decision going. Just realize the first thing is they're not ruling on whether or not Trump engaged in an insurrection. That's not what's being questioned here. So those that spent time watching or listening to the briefs in the presentation, what I got from it, and it started to make a lot more sense. Like initially, Trump's team was arguing stupid details about the language within that text. So the term officer versus office was being argued, you know.
Right, right.
And so when you look at the provision in Article 3, one of the things that the judges questioned when the attorney for Colorado was speaking was about the fact that the president and vice president are not listed specifically in that article. So it talks about the representatives, the Senate, you know, those that hold office and da 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 da. But it doesn't say the president and the vice president. And so what I was getting from their line of questioning was that it's highly suggestive that if it was including them, it would have listed them. Now, the problem that I have, I'm going to keep looking over here because I have another screen here where I pulled it up. The problem that I have is that as it reads, it reads, no person shall be a senator or representative in Congress or elector of the president or vice president or hold any office, civil or military under the United States. Right there. End it there as far as the beginnings here, right? So the elector part, that's the person that, you know, we know all about the elector scheme that went on, and they send the electors to cast the votes for the state. So you can't be one of those. You can't be a senator. You can't be a representative if you've engaged in insurrection or rebellion. The point about mine, like I have this, like, you know, legal trap kind of mind, is it says or hold any office, civil or military. Okay. When you look at the president is the commander in chief of the armed services. That, in my mind, it makes him an officer in the military. And that would have been the argument that I would have made if I were Colorado trying to justify why the president should be included underneath this article. It didn't come up. They never really pulled on those strings. But the precedent before this was a case called Griffin's case, and it was mentioned quite a bit in that show. And it had to do with decisions that were already made, like in 1869, I think it was, that kind of already constructed this argument. To look further down, when you go to Section 5, and this is where I think that Colorado is going to lose. When you go to Section 5, Section 4, it talks about actually, hold on a second because I'm scrolling. Okay, yeah, Section 5. It says Congress shall have the power to enforce by appropriate legislation, okay, the provisions of this article. And so what is being considered is the fact that the president is not listed in this Article 3, but also to enforce this, they have to create laws through legislation that will enforce that article, okay? So to begin with, the question is coming down is who has the right to enforce this provision, right? Is it the states? Do the states have the right to enforce the provision like Colorado did? Is it the courts that get the right to do this provision? Or is it the state legislature or in our national sense, Congress? And it's clear that it says they have the right through legislation process to enforce it. So I think what Colorado did was great in the sense that they basically went ahead and did this knowing full well it was going to go to the Supreme Court, because I think they just wanted to force a decision and some kind of construct on how this article can be enforced against someone that holds the office of the president. And so when you look at that law already exists. It just doesn't come in as part of the Constitution. It's actually a codified, it's called Section 8, 2383. And it reads just like the end section of, I have it up here too. It reads like the end section where it says that no one who has been engaged in insurrection, can hold office. Okay, and that is encompassing that text in the code, the actual law that was created for this. It encompasses the president. However, you have to be found guilty and convicted of insurrection for that law to apply. That's the law that Jack Smith could have used to go after these individuals if they were actually charging them with insurrection. That would have been the law that they used for that insurrection act, and he didn't. And I think that's the stumbling block that all the states that want to keep him off the ballot are going to face, is that he wasn't charged with insurrection. So whether or not we all agree that it was an insurrectionist act, because he's not in Article 3, then he has to be prosecuted and convicted under that law of insurrection in order not to be eligible to hold office anymore. So I think the 14th Amendment issue is going to be a dead issue. I don't think that there's anyone that's going to be able to use that against him to keep him off the ballot, given what I've seen, given what I've read, given what it looked like with the Supreme Court. And I'm sure they're going to put it to an end. But like I was saying to some of the people, was like, this is a good thing in that at least we're going to have finally some understanding of how this is going to apply, because this is not a one-off situation. You know, as much as I don't think there'll be another Donald Trump that will be so brazen and have such a following, I just think that it's good to have that in our back pocket and the knowledge of, because I think in the next, if they give it some thought, I question Jack Smith, I question Merrick Garland. I don't know why they didn't go after the insurrection clause and charge him with that. They should have known themselves. They're smarter on this issue than I am. So they should have known that wasn't going to play out unless they had charged them with insurrection. But they might not even been thinking about keeping them off the ballot. You know, it wasn't a goal of theirs. Their goal was to charge them with crimes that they thought they had the evidence to prove, which is what you do when you're a good lawyer, you know. So I think that's where it's at there. There's room to discuss it as far as how Trump's lawyers were trying to pull it back. And I think that's a good thing, because the Supreme Court still has to respond to what Trump's lawyers were asking about and talking about, whether or not that language itself applies to the office of the president, whether the president's considered an officer to begin with. You know, and by definition, he's an officer. Okay, whether you want to consider him an officer because of the military aspect and position he holds there, or just merely the fact that he's a bureaucrat, that he holds office, he runs, you know, for the public. These things all make him an officer by definition. So I don't think they're. It was funny because watching them or listening to them, I was getting the impression that they weren't impressed with Trump's argument. And I think that's true. I don't think they were impressed with his argument in terms of trying to nitpick and cherry pick terms and little bits of language disputes, when really he should have just been going after the fact that the president's not listed there, and that the provision in the U.S. code allows the president to be charged under a crime there. But they had stupid arguments, like he was trying to argue, right, that this is double jeopardy, right? That was one of their arguments. Double jeopardy. I've already been tried and impeached and not convicted. Therefore, I can't be charged for the second crime. That's an asinine attack, because double jeopardy means you cannot have your life or limb put in jeopardy for the same crime, right? So the problem is that he wasn't charged with a crime in an impeachment process, and he was charged for impeachment articles on a different charging basis. The accusations were not the insurrectionist charge. So it didn't apply, and it's not a criminal procedure. That's the other problem. There's no consequence, and that's that life or limb aspect. There's no consequence for impeachment other than removal, and they can decide on after removal. After they vote on removal, they can vote to decide to ban him from holding office again when the Senate convicts. Those are not life or limb things. He's not losing his liberties. He's not losing his freedom. There's nothing that would have gone on to him. He wouldn't have been incarcerated, anything like that. So that whole double jeopardy argument was kind of asinine, you know?
Bullshit. Don't fly. Here's some of the things that I got out of listening. It was very interesting how millions of people were glued to the screen watching pictures of the face of the voices, hearing the voices. And one of the things I heard that, because we talked about this, Coach, we talked about this ballot thing. This wasn't going to be some kind of slam dunk deal where they were just going to go in and say, oh, yeah, Colorado, you got it. You're right. You win. When Justice Kagan asked why a single state should decide who gets to be president of the United States, and a liberal judge, okay, who happened to ask that question, I listened and later on started thinking about several things. You brought up a couple. How do we allow state by state to determine this? And again, how is it determined? Is it done by the state's Secretary of State? Is it done by a panel of judges? Is it done by a committee of some kind? It's not going to be the same in every single state. Now, mind you, that in this case right here, again, they're saying, and you felt it, right? We can't just leave it. Kagan really set it up when she asked this. We can't see us making the decision to allow each state to determine who the president of the United States is. Because, of course, remember that the election process and the voting process for the presidency of the United States is a whole lot different than voting for your local representative or congressman or even your state senator. It's a whole different ballgame. So also what got to me was when I heard the part of, so what are we going to do? You know, this can open up a Pandora's box where, and you could see it, especially with the divide in politics today, but people start getting petty and say, you know what, shit, fucking that coach, some motherfucking coach gets on my fucking nerves, man. Hey, kick this guy off the fucking ballot. He can't be on the ballot. You know, it's true. You can't. And then what are you going to have? A handful of states determining the presidency of the United States? That's crazy.
You know, the sad part of that argument is just what you just said, is that that's what happens already, right? Because you have these nullifying states like Texas is red, Connecticut is blue, California is blue, but Florida's red. So they kind of cancel each other out on those aspects. And it comes down to the swing states already. We already know that maybe 7 states are the ones that ultimately decide who wins the presidency. So to me, that was kind of like, geez, you know, and it's not what they're saying, but I was thinking in my mind, well, shit, we got that already. But I agree with you. When I heard that, I understood that point, and I thought that's a very good point. Simply because if you remember, just maybe a month ago, you know, they were trying to suggest that Biden is responsible for an insurrection because of the border. Like these are the crazies that do this shit. But and now you see that trigger word. You're looking at it like, well, if this went through and Colorado was successful in keeping him off the ballot, you could see these red states accusing, you know, Biden of insurrection and banning him. And now this state has the power and the courts don't to make those determinations and stuff. Not to say the courts should have the determination, but certainly the individual state should not necessarily be empowered with something that has to do with a national general election of the president. In within their own confines of their state, for their own representatives, their own governor, whatever, you know, it would make sense that they have that, but that's an internal thing anyways. But to give a state the ability to just, I'd say randomly, I know it wouldn't be random on their part, but randomly keep an individual off the ballot because they don't like his politics, we would get that. That's what would be going on. Every single state would start to keep people off the ballot because of some insurrectional rebellion type action that they want to define, that they want to call that without a real true definition use of the words. And that's the other part of it. Like, it's not just insurrection. This was driving me nuts listening to them about this. And again, I think they box themselves in corners sometimes with their arguments. It also says or rebellion. And insurrection and rebellion are not by definition the same thing. That's why it says insurrection or rebellion. You know, so rebellion can be as simple as a defying action against the authority of the government. That's a rebellion. Whereas an insurrection has to do with acts of violence, a physical attack on the government to overthrow something, which was clearly what went on January 6th with those individuals that attacked the police barricades, broke into the Congress, and then went around and did damage in their building, seeking out to do some kind of harm to the individuals that were there to take care of the certification. So, it is one of those things that there's a lot of things in this Article 3 that no one had to look at. Like it was said, this is unprecedented territory. We haven't had to address this issue since the founding of this country, whether or not or it would have been decided already. So the question was whether or not it applies to the president. We would know this already if it had come up before, and
Right.
it had. And so at the end of the day, we will know the interpretation, the definitions of, whether or not the definition of holding office and being an officer and all that stuff, where those things are actually defining points as far as who qualifies under those definitions and stuff. But ultimately, had Jack Smith charged Donald Trump with insurrection, he would have to be convicted for the law that's currently on the books, the law itself to apply to him, in which he could not hold office. So at this point, I don't see any way that the 14th Amendment can be used against Donald Trump.
No. And the other thing, by the way, did you feel it, Coach? So, taking everything that we've said and what we heard yesterday, and can you feel the theme that it says? My theme is, well, in this case, we just can't throw it to the states.
Oh, yeah.
But in 2000, Bush versus Gore, that's exactly what they did, was throw it to the state of Florida and let Florida decide it.
Well, and this is the thing that's interesting about that Bush-Gore decision, was that they clearly said that this decision is not meant to set precedent. And so when they intervened in the vote, and Bush was awarded the electorals and became the president, the Supreme Court was like, this is a one-off. We're just dealing with this one-off. This is not setting precedent, which means that basically you can bring the same argument back in front of the courts and end up with a different decision, and be prepared, if that's the case, to hear a different decision. The really sad part about that particular case was that at the end of the day, Gore actually won the Florida count and would have been the president had they allowed the count to go forward and continue till its fullest. But yeah, I mean, Florida was able to hand the electorals to Bush, and we had him as president. But none of that really bothers me. Like I'm not a Republican on that side of the aisle, and certainly nothing like with the Trumper. But we have never had a president, Democrat or Republican, that is this abusive, that is this repugnant, that is this fascist, that is, just everything that we can pile on for terrible adjectives onto Donald Trump, I think is applicable. And so I think at this point, this is the time to make sure that we can rein in the president with the laws that we have. And if the laws we have aren't sufficient, we can create laws that will be sufficient to manage the situation. It is going to give us a template now on how banning people from the ballot are going to be allowed to go on. And I don't think it's going to end up in the court's hands. I don't think that it's going to be a scenario where, and I mean court's hands in terms of the Supreme Court making a decision each time. I mean it in the sense that we're going to have a very distinct, maybe even a revised codified law that includes specifically the president of the United States, and really lay it out there that whether he has to be convicted, I'm sure that's going to be the aspect that he's going to have to be charged and convicted in order for him to lose his life, liberty, happiness, whatever, because of his actions. So I think that's where we're going to end up. We're going to end up where Congress has to pass something. We can lean on right now the section that exists, but I think they can do a better job with it. But right now there is a section that exists that's a law that had they charged him with it and he'd been convicted, this wouldn't even be discussed. He just wouldn't be eligible regardless. And that would apply to all 50 states.
Yeah. And you were talking earlier also, the other thing, because look, they kind of were comparing the Bush Gore throwing it to Florida, then not throwing it. This is a whole different ball game here, because again, this is unprecedented. This has never happened before. But when you go to the text of Section 3 of the 14th, it's something how, because when you read it, Coach, it's been defined as the mechanism right there in that little section there, the mechanism is to keep our democracy together, to hold us together against an insurrection, against a rebellion, against the government. And yet, I want to get to what you said. Nowhere there does it list the president or the vice president. You would think if there's anywhere they should be listed, is right there.
And the thing is, I think when you look at who is included, right? Senate representatives, these are individuals that are voted in by their own individual state. So I think the provision of Article 3 was meant to give the states something to use, not the nation something to use. Remember, this is something that came out of the Civil War, and trying to keep gerrymandering from going on, and giving people that were, enemies of the nation, positions in government, and giving them the ability to, say, have the South rise again, as they say. So when you look at it, yes, it's in the Constitution as an amendment, but I think it's meant as a guideline for the individual states to use in their decision making on who in their state can run for Senate, who in their state can, and not just state Senate, but also federal, because you're still picking that from a state voting situation. So Rhode Island doesn't choose Connecticut senators. Connecticut chooses its own senators. And I think that's when I take a step back. I think that was kind of what some of that was hinting towards, that this article is meant to give the states something to use as a guideline, and to be able to bar individuals that they feel are radical, that they feel are a threat to our Constitution, that this empowers this individual state to keep them from holding office on a national level and on a local level, because it includes both. So I just think that that's why the president of the United States is enlisted there, because the president is elected by the entire country, not by one individual state. And that's why I think that they're missing, the vice president and president are missing from that article section.
And here's the thing, going along with what you were saying. So if you take everything you said right there, which is factual, by the way, so where is it? Because when we talk about the Constitution, when we use the Constitution, when we use the words the founding fathers, for me, it was always like, in reverence, like these were geniuses. How could you create this? How could you create this fucking? How could you know? How could you know? How could you play every scenario in your mind and cover virtually everything? But then, if that's the case, Coach, all of this, and I agree with you, by the way, the deal using the 14th Section 3 on Donald Trump, that's a lost cause now, because this is not going to happen, and you can all just can that shit right there. But throughout all of this, we talked about the 14th Section 3, but nowhere in the Constitution has anybody brought up, maybe we got to do some homework one day, Coach, and do a Constitution show, because then where the fuck does the president get checked in the Constitution?
Well, the checks and balances are designed in the structure of the three parts of our governmental assay. So you have
no. I mean directly. Just like you take the 14th Section 3. You explained it beautiful when you were saying about the states and then representatives and senators, and that made a lot of sense. So what I'm wondering is, then why is it that nowhere do we have it where the president can be checked, literally mentioned and checked.
I think the thinking nowadays is that the president is checked by the ballot box. And this is what the Republicans want to keep it that way. They want to always argue that these types of decisions should be decided at the ballot box, and that if you want to keep them in check, the way to do it is to not vote them in. I think part of the stumbling block too, when you're looking at past presidents, certainly going back from the beginning of our country until the 1900s, they were men of integrity on some level when it came to their I don't want to call it patriotism because that's used so terribly nowadays, but they're patriots. And so I think that they trusted in the people and in the electors to select the president that was not going to be somebody who would try to overthrow the government and become a king. And the guidelines, those bumpers that are there, we know don't allow the president to become a king. It's very clear in the Constitution that that's not the case. As a matter of fact, they wanted to, when they put George Washington in as the first president, they wanted to call him a king. And he declined that. And that's what they came up with that term president versus king, because he said no man should be king. And so, that goes to the character of the people that were in the process of developing the Constitution. And you're right, they were geniuses. And the most genius aspect of the Constitution is that it's a living, breathing document. It can be changed. It can be amended. Things that are in it can be taken out. Things that are absent can be added in. This is the construct. We did not nail ourselves to the wall and make this stiff constitutional aspect and say this is fixed. Nothing can be changed. Nothing can be altered. This is what's going to guide our country. They had enough sense to know better than that. And these are, when you look at historically who was involved in much of this constitutional aspect, were written papers from even before the start of our country. These were thoughts and ideas and philosophies that existed, that existed, and that was part of the reason why we migrated to America, to get away from authoritarian rule, to get away from kings and queens, and actually create a democracy in which the people had a say in how they were going to be governed, And, people can argue, and they do, that this is not a democracy. And you're right, it's not a democracy. What we are is we're a democratic republic. Okay. So our democratic aspect is the individual's rights to cast a vote. That's the democratic aspect. But when you're looking at it from a republic standpoint, it's that we're casting our vote, and then the state chooses its electors to go and cast the vote in Congress for that to be certified. And they don't have to go along with what the state had voted. And this is the crazy part of it. Like if the electors in Connecticut, if they wanted to pull a fast one, they could easily go and cast their votes for the other party. It doesn't happen, but it could happen, and it's allowed to happen. That's part of the problem with it not being a democracy over a republic, is that those people are really the ones that are casting the vote and choosing the next president, though they are followed by the guideline of whatever the state popular vote was. They're not held to that. It's not, some states have rules, but they're not laws, and that's what it comes down to.
Because my thing is just, you're a bunch of geniuses, and you and those around you and those before you all come from places where there were kings and queens and monarchies and dictatorships. I would have just thought that a bunch of smart guys that put this incredible document together would have had one little place somewhere that said, oh, by the way, so just so we're clear, that the fucking president and the vice president can't lose their goddamn mind one day and try to take over this country. They literally left it like a gentleman's word, because the position of president, of course, back then was such an honorable position.
Put it into context. When you put it, we do have those bumpers, right? That's what impeachment is for. And you have to realize that at the founding of this country, there was no political parties in the fashion that we have now, where you have only two political parties that play tug of war for power. It wasn't like that back in the day. You had individuals with difference of opinions, and they created the Whig Party and stuff like that. But those were more like, the Freemasons and this and that. They weren't a political force the way that they are nowadays with the Republican Party and the Democratic Party. So initially, when it came out, they didn't foresee such partisanship occurring. It was almost a common sense rule. So if somebody was impeached, and they did impeach some people, back in the day, they used impeachment. No one's ever been removed as the president for impeachment, but that is the power that they bestowed upon the people to be able to keep your president and vice president and other elected officials in check. So when they did it, it made sense. It was good. But no one saw back then that what's going to happen is you're going to have a split Congress. You're going to have one house controlled by one group of people that are like-minded, all in tow. They're going to vote with each other. That's the name of the game, is stick together. And then you have a different house that's doing something. And that's what we ended up with, right? So Trump wants to, he wants to tout his horn that he was impeached but not convicted. Listen, that's not a brag. That's not a brag. Being twice impeached is even less of a brag. The fact that you were not convicted by a Senate that was controlled by a majority of Republicans, this is what they never saw happening when they wrote those provisions. They never saw that coming down to such a partisanship that one whole party of people would control one whole section of the government. It could not have been planned for. No one could have foresaw that in the 1700s.
No. Can't think of everything, right?
No.
So this goes into the hands of the Supreme Court justices now. They'll, look at what they have. But as probably predicted, you can't see this going any other way except them overturning Colorado's decision, therefore opening it up to the states, letting the states know now that, no, you guys are not going to decide.
And as frustrating as it is, I think that's the reasonable and rational decision.
I think it's fair. I think it's fair in a case like this because, I'm from the old school, Coach. I don't want to see. There's always a bully, and you wonder as a kid who's going to kick that bully's ass. I come from a place where, you see, I don't want to wonder or wait for you to kick that bully's ass. I want to do it myself.
Right.
I want to do it myself. And what I'm getting at is here, you're gonna beat a guy, then beat him at the ballot box. Because when you look at what has happened since Trump lost, how Republicans have lost in 22 and 23, red seats being flipped to blue, abortion. I can't imagine if there's ever a losing messaging to put out there in the history of politics that I've ever saw, Coach, is the messaging of abortion, of restricting women's rights, and it's not working, and they won't change the tactic.
That again, that issue of abortion, this is what has become the strength of that evangelical party, if you will, and they are a political party at this point. They're no longer separation of church and state. They're a political party. This is a win for them, but I think what goes around comes around. Personally, I think that we have a very conservative court right now, but that won't always be the case, and these things can be brought back up at a different time, and a different decision can be made, and therefore a new interpretation will be back, and Roe versus Wade won't be the title of it, but there will be a new expansive abortion rights package at some point. It's just a matter of when, how long does it take to kind of flip that Supreme Court back to a more liberal court,
Yeah. And as we were discussing in our first topic, that'll take us to our next topic. We're going two topics today. It's what's going on, and we want to make sure that we cover that here on our end. Uh, as you were saying, Coach, when you look at the Constitution, all right, it is so well written, and there are checks and balances. And we talked about how the president basically, I guess you could say, is kept in check it's like what do they call it? A gentleman's. He gets a break. He gets a pass from any direct check in the Constitution. But the Constitution also makes it clear that no man is above the law. That is something that no one can argue. You can twist and turn whatever you want about the Constitution. The Constitution clearly states no man is above the law. And when the Constitution says no man is above the law, that means no man, no woman, no one.
Right.
So for anyone to think, well, it's different with me. I should get immunity. I should get a pass. I should get a break. And by the way, I took a break from my brain dead for the last couple of weeks as I've been dealing with a personal issue. But I say that to say that here we are in a world, in a land of laws. Everything we do consciously, knowing that some of the decisions that we make, if we do them the wrong way, there's going to be legal consequences to what we do. I drive a luxury Cadillac, and I also like to drive fast. I drive, 85, 90, 95 without even blinking. I also understand that if I pass a state trooper at 95 miles an hour, he might not like that. And he may take it into his own hands to, I don't know, rev that engine up and throw it in drive and throw on some lights and pull me over. And he may choose to make it an unpleasant stop too. Only I can really control how far it goes, so maybe I'll have to sit there and take some shit. In other words, it's the law. What the fuck am I going to do? I gotta.
Right.
So, from the AP, a federal appeals panel ruled Tuesday that Donald Trump can face trial on charges that he plotted to overturn the results of the 2020 election, sharply rejecting the former president's claims that he is immune from prosecution while setting the stage for additional challenges that could further delay the case. I think over here was put in, for the purposes of this criminal case, former President Trump has become Citizen Trump, with all the defenses of any other criminal defendant, the court wrote. But any executive immunity that may have protected him while he served as president no longer protects him against this prosecution. There'll be no immunity. Now, just like we expected, Coach, in the ballot case, pretty clear that Colorado decision was going to be overturned, and now we've heard the SCOTUS. This immunity thing, and you touched on how Trump's team didn't really show out for the SCOTUS on the ballot deal. But then again, in that case, they really didn't have to. On this immunity one, I got to give it to Donald Trump and what he does to his attorneys, Coach. I know. It is amazing the things that come out of their mouth, the scenarios they come up with. They got it from him, and they're really smart because they memorize all this shit that he gives them. But Coach, no immunity. Basically, the court politely said, "Get the fuck out of here with that bullshit."
And that's the beauty of watching the Supreme Court take on the argument of the 14th Amendment, because you get a taste of their personality and where their mind thinking is and how they view the law and the interpretations of the law. So she made the decision that there's no immunity for criminal liability for a past president. There's no such thing as absolute immunity. And so they the Trump team, appealed it. And the appeals court, in their decision, they constructed it so well that I think they painted the Supreme Court into a corner with it. They're very thorough. And people are upset, oh, it's taking months and stuff. Well, it takes months. It takes months to construct something like this because you are doing your homework. You just don't have it where you can type in on your computer and pull up these references and it's right there. You have to know what you're looking for, and you have to read through it and make sure that it applies to the point, even though it might be relevant to what you're talking about and it might not be specific enough, things like that. So it takes time to construct this. But what I realized in reading it as a whole is that they've used the Supreme Court's own words against this case already. So all these decisions that have already been met at different cases throughout the years, going back to, again, the beginning of our country, they've used wording in quotes that show that there's no such thing as a presidential immunity outside of the criminal liability. Now, the argument that they're making, and again, this is part of like the asinine scenario, right? They're not arguing that he's not guilty of these things. That's not part of their argument.
No.
So they're
not denying it. No,
frivolous details, right? So looking at this right here, there was 3 points that the president. I'm just going to read this paragraph. It says Trump advances 3 grounds for establishing this expansive immunity for former presidents. Number 1, Article 3. Lacks the power to review the president's official acts under the separation of powers document. So what he's saying is that under separation of powers, it means that the president cannot be checked by the Congress or the courts. And that is not at all. What it's saying in the separation of powers is that Congress cannot infringe on the president's rights to govern the way that the president is allowed to govern. They can't change his role or his, privileges and stuff like that. And neither can the courts in that respect. But it doesn't mean that they can't be reviewed, because that's the whole idea of having a 3-pronged system, because you have a lawmaking branch, you have a law executing branch. The president executes the laws, Congress makes the laws, and the Supreme Court determines the laws and their validity.
And the judicial branch, which reviews. That's right.
So here's going back, like, Donald Trump has the dumbest fucking lawyers I've ever fucking seen when I read the shit that they present. But I realize this is not them. This is not the lawyers' arguments. No. This is Donald Trump's baby mind, who reads one thing, thinks he understands it, and forces them to make it their argument in court. He's an idiot. He's an idiot. I don't think he has any grounds to win on this anyways. Number 2, functionally, policy considerations rooted in the separation of power require immunity to avoid intruding on the executive branch functions. Okay. Immunity right now is not necessary for the executive branch to function, because the guidelines of how the executive branch functioning are already in place. This is what a president is allowed to do: executive actions. He can sign bills into law. He can do these types of things. Certainly appoint people for certain positions for foreign, policies and stuff like that. So he can govern. He can govern already. It's not a question of he needs immunity to govern. You don't need immunity from crimes unless you're a fucking criminal, right? So let's start right there. What is allowed for immunity right now, and it was been acknowledged by the courts, is that you can't civilly sue the president of the United States for acts that he took that are within the scope, even on the outside reaches of the scope of his office, right? So just because you don't like the fact that he signed the bill that freed all the slaves, right? You can't sue him for that. That's not allowed. He can't be held accountable in a civil lawsuit for that. Right now, the DOJ has a policy, if you will. It's not a law, it's a policy where they will not indict a sitting president. Okay. But that does not negate the fact that the president is still held accountable for the laws that he breaks that are outside of the realm of his presidency. And this is the problem Donald Trump is running into, is that they're trying to argue that he had the right to create this insurrectionist act because he was the president of the United States, and therefore everything he does is within the office of the president of the United States. This is kind of like, paraphrasing their argument, which clearly is not the case. Okay. If that were the case, and they make this point in the decision, if that were the case, then Gerald Ford would have no reason to pardon Richard Nixon. Okay. Gerald Ford gave Richard Nixon a pardon because he knew he was open to prosecution when he left office. That's the only reason why you would extend a pardon to somebody, was to avoid prosecution. So it's already been accepted by the presidents themselves that they are open to prosecution. Bill Clinton was open to prosecution. Okay. He had to, and was forced to go and sit for depositions during his presidency for claims by Jones there. So Clinton versus Jones, he actually had, and that's what got him impeached. He sat for that deposition and he lied during the deposition and said he had nothing to do with Jones and sexual harassment and all this kind of stuff. And, and then of course, the whole other issue that went on with the cigar. But this is what so again, accountability of the president still exists, and the courts have already met that. They've already seen that going on, that's the accountability. So, and they've totally rejected his claim that the president can go ahead and shoot somebody on Fifth Avenue and you can't arrest them. Okay. This, again, they bring up this whole argument that because he was impeached and not convicted, okay, then he has immunity on that you can't touch him because he's already been that double jeopardy claim again, coming in with that nonsense. So you have these decisions that came down from the 3-panel appeals court that basically painted them in a corner. I don't see how, given the language of that decision, I would tell everybody to go read it. I mean, we hear that all the time when big news comes out about these things. Go read it. Okay. I read it. It was 58 pages. I spent time with it. I cut and pasted and I sent you that 12-page, abridged version of the decision. And it is sound. It is so sound. I cannot see how the Supreme Court can take it up and suggest that they would come to any other decision. The only reason why I would see them doing it would be to put it to rest once and for all. To allow it to go into the Supreme Court's hand, allow the Supreme Court to affirm the appeals court's decision. And that way, there's no more question about it. There's no such thing as absolute immunity for the president of the United States for criminal acts that he did during the time in office. That needs to be, settled once and for all. If they take it up, I'm hoping that's what they would be looking to do, because to change anything out of the decision for the appeals court means you're changing hundreds of years of interpretation. This is not a one thing. This is not just about Donald Trump. This applies to every single decision that was put into this argument by the appeals court judge. When I read it, I said, Jesus Christ, this sounds like a friggin' indictment itself. Like they wrote it like they were the prosecutors rejecting this guy's claims and trying to present it to the courts itself. And that's what they did. Their decision was written for review. Okay, it wasn't written just for the decision itself. They constructed it for review because the Supreme Court's going to review it. There's no question about it. And then they decide to take it on or not. So it is, it's a lob. It's a lob. They hit it out of the park.
Yeah, and I'm going to touch on that in a second, but I want to get another fact in here. And when I say fact, This is an indisputable. This is a fact. Just a fact. Okay, so listen carefully. If you ask for immunity, it is because you feel, you believe, and or you know that you have committed a crime or a shitload of crimes. So let me repeat real simple before we continue. This is a fact. You don't ask for immunity unless you feel, believe, or know you're guilty of something. It is the only reason why, as a person, all by yourself, no media, no friends, no lawyers, no one, just you and your thoughts. I want immunity. Why? Because I fucked up and I know I fucked up. And if I don't get no fucking immunity, my ass is cooked. That's why you ask for immunity, people. Okay. So all this, what crimes? What crime? Tell me what crimes he's been charged with. Why the fuck is he asking for immunity? Why? I mean, it's just, and the other thing, coach, that you mentioned, this was so well written. I mean, it was so well written. So well written. And like you said, these things are done for review. That's why they're done the way they're done. It was so well written. They knew they made, and the people were wondering, like I said, why was this taking so long? It took a minute to put this shit together, people.
Yeah.
I mean, it said 57 pages. But that 57 pages, they couldn't just write that shit overnight. When you read it, coach, and I read it, and like you said, it was so clear. They were sending a message to the Supreme Court. They were sending a message to the lower courts. They were sending a clear message everywhere. Here it is, right here. This is where it should end, right here, and this is why. And this is the Supreme Court's easy way, because on this one, they want an out. They want an out here. The ballot one is a different story. They can still find a way out of there, but they want out of this one. This immunity shit right here. So.
The interesting thing is they made it clear, like this immunity case is not about the insurrection, right? In the sense that it's not about the term insurrection or the crime of insurrection. They really they eviscerated his arguments, right? So what they pointed out, and again, this is one of the reasons why I don't think the Supreme Court can do anything different. What they pointed out was that he violated his oath of office, okay, and basically overstepped his position as president by interfering with the electoral count, right? Because he has no role in the Constitution. The president has no role in that proceeding, okay? He has no role to be, involved in anything to do with the electoral count and certification of those votes. And yet he put himself into a role of a detractor, of somebody who's an interrupter. And those things are illegal, okay? And it violates not only, specific laws on those counts, but also the what is it? The election count of I don't even remember the title of it, but they cited the whole electoral count case. So what you have is you have them laying it out that this is what he did. It's not talking about inciting the insurrection or anything like that. They're saying that he overstepped. He illegally involved himself in the electoral count. And the interesting thing that they put in there was that he broke the law by trying to stay in power when he was no longer the president. So once he lost the election, he was no longer the president, if you will, and he usurped it by trying to take the presidency back by force. And so the point that they made was that it's clear that you can't serve more than 4 years in one term, and your term was over, and the term was not extended. in the election. You were not reelected, and therefore you weren't entitled to any more time in office than what your 4 years provided. And that's what they're going after. And so I think that they kind of threw it up there as a lob that the Supreme Court can't make any other decisions other than these rational decisions based on the events that we're all well aware of. It's not a political motive hit job like Trump would like to think. It is clearly just case law and past precedent and other interpretations that have already met the standards of suggesting that there's no such thing as absolute immunity. You know, there's certain types of immunities that presidents have, and I'm not going to break them all down, but absolute immunity and certainly immunity from criminal acts while you're holding office does not come in play. The acts have to be within the scope of your job as president, within your authorities, not outside your authorities, and you're not a king, and they made it clear you're not a king, so therefore you can't just do whatever you want.
No, and as they said in this decision, we cannot accept former President Trump's claim that a president has unbounded authority to commit crimes that would neutralize the most fundamental check on executive power, the recognition and implementation of election results. Nor can we sanction his apparent contention that the executive has carte blanche to violate the rights of individual citizens to vote and to have their votes count.
Right.
At bottom, former President Trump's stance would collapse our system of separated powers by placing the president beyond the reach of all three branches. Presidential immunity against federal indictment would mean that, as president, the Congress could not legislate, the executive could not prosecute, and the judiciary could not review. Understand something, people. So I love the way, when faced with this question, Trump said, no. I don't just mean me. All presidents. From this point on, let me tell you, people, he don't give a fuck about the next president. He doesn't give a fuck about the next senator, the next president, or nothing. Donald Trump, if Donald Trump wins the presidency, he will remain president. He's going to remain president until he dies, until he's assassinated, whatever. Okay, so you think he gives a fuck about what immunity the next president has? He knows that by the time he's done with this term, Congress is going to have to fucking change all the rules. We're going to have to go back to the Constitution. We're going to have to go into it. He made what this guy, hey, he's a historical figure, Coach. He is one for the history books.
No doubt. They'll be teaching him in law school forever.
He wanted popularity. He's always wanted to be well known, liked. I don't know if he's, obviously the like part is only by his cult. But you look at all of this, and he literally, because you said it earlier, people, he's not denying this stuff.
Right.
He's not denying this stuff. That, again, another reason about immunity. Immunity means I could tell you I did it. I was watching a show with my wife. She's watching one of her Blue Blood shows. And this man is beating on his wife, and she's afraid it's gonna fester over to the son. It's probably like a 10, 11, 12-year-old kid. It looks like it's about to fester. Well, fast forward, when it ends, the cops really want to take him in really badly. But they can't. She comes with a gun in the middle of the street in front of the courthouse. She shoots him. And all the cops come out. Oh, okay. She holds the gun out. No problem. Here you go. And she looks at the cop. Lady, you're under arrest. She said, you can't touch me. What do you mean you can't touch you? She said, I have diplomatic immunity.
There you go. And that's a fact.
That's some shit. That's some shit to be able to do something like that
Yeah.
and know you can't do anything to me.
Right.
Donald Trump wants to be able to do that. You give Donald Trump absolute immunity, and all you clowns that kiss his ass, you're gonna find out how much he don't give a fuck about it. None of you.
And the interesting part about it, right, was that his argument was that that a president can't effectively govern if he has to work within the threat of lawsuits and criminal prosecution. And the courts kind of laughed at that because, first of all, every president before Trump has lived under the understanding that they can be held liable for criminal activity. So every president who has governed already has governed fine within the scope of their office. And other than Nixon has not had any real threat of criminal liability when they've left office.
Right, right.
So they kind of rejected that, just outright. The other part of it was they said this. I'm going to read it because it goes along with that. It says, our analysis is guided, and this goes about the strength of their case. Our analysis is guided by the Constitution, federal statutes, and history, as well as concerns of public policy. Relying on these sources, we reject all three potential bases for immunity, both as a categorical defense to federal criminal prosecutions. So what they're saying, and they go further on that and say that the checks and balances, the threat, if you will, of being held liable for criminal activity actually is a good thing. And it protects the Constitution, and it keeps them in check from just running rampant like Donald Trump wants to do and do whatever they want, break any law they want, anytime they want, and just be like, you can't touch me, can't touch this, And so they looked at all the angles that Donald Trump's attorneys were trying to play with, and they sliced them all up. They filleted them. There's not anything where I was done reading it and said, wow, geez, that kind of left the door open, except for one. And the one thing that they said in their decision was that if he is, how did they word it? If he's allowed to do these things and have immunity, then basically the case itself, all the cases that are against him have to go away, But they furthered that statement by breaking it down as to why that's not the case and why that should not happen and why these prosecutions should go forward. But it's just that there's one line that they put was like, this is the only thing that Donald Trump could try to exploit. But when you read on, you realize that they left them no room to exploit it. But it did read a little bit funny. So what you end up with at the end of the day is you end up with all this precedent with Supreme Court's decisions in prior cases about immunities. You're talking about past practices of other presidents. You're talking about the situations like they point out with Nixon and getting the pardon from Ford and why that is indicative of the aspect that presidents can be held criminally liable for their actions while in office, And so all of these cases, there's no way. This is not the 14th Amendment win that he just had. This is a loss, and it's not going to get overturned. There's no way in hell that even though like Clarence Thomas, he'll probably be the one fucking guy that would vote to overturn this appeal. Like he's the only fucking shyster on there that is a Trumper. The rest of them are conservative, but they're not idiots. Even Amy Barrett, who we know about her lack of qualifications, she still asked good questions. She still had a good insight into what was being discussed and what was legal and what wasn't legal and stuff like that. So as much as we might not like a conservative court, I think we have at least a rational court when it comes to this immunity issue, because there's no way they can bestow it. And we know this. Here's the bottom line fact. You got Elise, Stefanik, that wants to be like the vice president under Trump, coming out and saying, if it were me, if I were Pence, I wouldn't have certified the election. First of all, that's not their role. We know this already. That's a whole argument why Pence went forward and certified the election, because you have nothing. you're a ceremonial role, and they changed the law to even explicitly say your role is ceremonial now.
That's it. That's it.
In law, that you can't fucking say you're not opening. All you're supposed to do is open the envelope sent to you from the state governor and read the friggin' thing, right?
That's it.
But give him presidential immunity, right? Joe Biden doesn't have to leave office then. Kamala Harris doesn't have to certify an election. She could throw out all the electors and say we're not going to certify this election. We're going to stay in office. Biden can stay in office. It's not a violation of the 2-term limit, so he can stay another 4 years. So there's like, they really have to consider what they're doing. Now, sadly, the Democrats aren't that fucking shiesty. They wouldn't fucking do that. Though I would. If I was a fucking president, I'd stick it right up his ass. I'd be like, I ain't going nowhere. Matter of fact, I'm going to put a fucking military blockade around the White House and tell you to come get me, motherfucker.
Yep. I would have said it as soon as the immunity shit came out. I would have said, well, listen, I just want to make it clear to the American public that if Donald Trump is granted immunity, that means I have immunity. So we win. You'll never have to worry. Yeah. Now, by the way.
And then I'd call Donald Trump to the Oval Office and I'd fucking shoot him and kill him right there on the floor.
Right there. Yeah. On live TV so you could all see
live TV.
Now, mind you that, as I said earlier, that in order to consider needing immunity, then you must have done something wrong. It isn't just, Trump doesn't just want immunity from what he's done, people. He wants immunity for what he's going to do. What is he going to do? I don't know. I'm not in his fucking mind. But he wants immunity. I've heard this thrown around, Coach. Scary but true. Trump didn't know what he was doing the first time. He didn't know what he was getting into.
Right.
As the second half of his term came around, he started to figure out the people that he shouldn't have, that he needed yes men and yes women in there. He started to figure this shit out, but he didn't have enough time to do it. Now he's had enough time in these 4 years to hone that even better and better. If he gets another chance, now this time he has a plan. And you think that's going to involve a lot of shit that he's going to need immunity for.
You make a great point, Ralph. And to add to that point is that we're very fortunate that COVID hit America during his presidency, because that really distracted what his pathway was. It kind of forced him to have to handle something entirely different.
Got in the way of his plan.
He might have learned after the first year how to manipulate the government, how to do the things, how to put in place people, who to fire, who to get rid of, who to hire, and really started to put that whole, that whole, crime syndicate together in his cabinet. And certainly now we know he wants to go over the civil service workers for getting the yes people in place. They want to get people in place that will blindly follow what the head of the department tells them to do. So it's not just getting the head of the department to go along with you, like Duvois in education. It's not enough just to have her on your side. You need to have the people that are going to carry out the orders, willing to do that without objection, without saying this is wrong, this is illegal, da 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 da. You need those people, and this is what they've learned from the previous administration, is that you got to go deeper than just cabinet people and heads of departments. You need to get those yes people, those loyalists, down into the aspect of who's actually on the ground, carrying out, walking it through, and making sure that whatever he wants done is going to get done. So it goes, and they figured that out. They know that it goes deeper than just having the right
remember, in Trump's administration, you don't need qualifications. You'll get it. As long as you bow down and you do what you're told, you got a job.
Well, when you look at their Project 2025, if you go to their website, it totally outlines their plan of getting rid of civil service workers and putting in people that they want. You can actually start applying for jobs right now on their website. So if you want to work for them and you apply for this job, I'm sure there's some kind of loyalty test that they put you through. I didn't go far enough in the application process. I just kind of started playing around with it, and it got to a point where it was asking me things that I didn't want to provide. But yeah, they're vetting people right now to fill roles inside the government in these civil service worker positions so that they can take over from day one. They have everybody ready to go. They're going to fire everybody that they know that they need to fire, and they're going to have these people put in place from day one. And that's what he means by being a dictator on the first day, is that they're going to chop down the cherry tree. That's what they're going to do.
And if you think that you get a taste of being dictator on day number one, that you're not going to wake up day two with the same taste in your mouth, come on.
Name one dictator in the history of the world that's ever advocated for one day give the power back to the people. Never happened. Never would.
He's a dictator every day. That's how you remain a dictator.
Right.
It's crazy. It's crazy. And now we look, Coach, as we get into our final thoughts here. I'm gonna open it up first, Coach. My final thoughts rest on where we're at here with the Supreme Court, with these two cases, with all these cases, with what it's really all about, for Trump. Again, as been clearly stated, he doesn't deny most of any of this. He openly, doesn't openly admit it, but he doesn't deny it. He's just saying that he has a right to, that he should have immunity, that he should be covered under Presidential Records Act, that he should be covered under every presidential protection that there is, all to run out the clock to the election. Yeah. Nikki Haley just got beat by none of the above. So that pretty much shuts that boat down. So there's only one way to beat Trump. That's going to be at the ballot. You're going to have to come out and vote, and you're going to have to beat him at the ballot box, because if you don't, well,
yeah.
Coach, final thoughts, Coach.
Final thoughts, I would say, first of all, with Nikki Haley losing to none of the above, that was because the people that are Trumpers that are going to go to the caucus and give him the 26 electoral went to the primary as well and voted against her. So that none of the above was really a vote for Trump. So she was going to lose that anyways. Yep. But the final thoughts about it goes for the immunity. Right now, what we have is we have a deadline on Trump. He had a week from the time the decision was released to file with the Supreme Court. Now, he'll wait to the last minute to file, because that's how much time he can stretch. He can stretch.
Of course.
The question that I see a lot of people taking on is, how long is the Supreme Court going to sit on this? I don't think they're going to sit on it. I don't think that they're going to waste time with it. I don't think that they're going to let it drag on. I don't think they have yet on any of these cases, whether it was the election cases when Donald Trump was bringing the election fraud to them, or even this case with the amendment, the 14th Amendment. They are actively working through these arguments. So I think that the question will be, do they take it up? If they take it up, then we know it's going to take a little longer, because they're going to have to present their arguments in front of the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court will therefore decide from there. Even if it's a foregone conclusion what they're going to decide, each side has the right to present their case in front of them, like they did with the 14th. But I feel like they're not going to take it on, because there's no room for any additional argument. The arguments that Trump is going to come forward with have already been placed forward in the appeals process, and in their initial claim at the district court level with Chuckin, who rejected their initial claim. Their claim hasn't changed. They haven't had a new angle. There's nothing new to their argument, so I don't see them being able to do that. So when you look at that, time frame wise, I feel like we're going to have a decision by the Supreme Court by the end of March. Okay, they're going to decide whether to take it up or not take it up by the end of March, maybe sooner, right? If they take it up, then we're probably looking at somewhere in the summertime to have that decision, okay? And then right there, that is the question: is if they decide he has immunity, then this all goes away. If they decide he doesn't have immunity, then we're looking at a fall case going forward in the courts. So you're looking at probably August, September, it making it to the courts. But if they reject it, we could have a case going forward in April, maybe early May. And then we have a decision by the end of the summer. Okay. And here's the most interesting thing about it is if Donald Trump is convicted, he has the right to appeal, but he's going to be appealing from a prison cell, because filing the appeal is not going to get him out of his sentencing and not going to his conviction and actually being put in jail. He will be put in jail. Now, can he bond out? I don't know about that, but he will actually go through the process of being incarcerated and then start his appeal process, because that's how it's going to work for him. He's going to end up being a convicted felon and have to appeal. What appeal could he possibly build on that? His immunity claim has already been rejected by the Supreme Court. So it would have to be a procedural type of claim for an appeal, like the prosecutors did something wrong, violated his rights somehow. These are not anything that he's going to win, because these guys are top on their game right now. He's screwed. He's going to be incarcerated at some point in his life.
You know, I mean, you can only hope for people like that, you know, because there's somebody who earned it, man. He earned it. I'm sorry, you know, I mean, this is just the kind of guy who earned it. But anyway, thank you for joining us, folks. This is Attack on the Politicos. It is the NGSC Sports Weekly Political Show. I'm your host, Ralph Garcia, this evening, joined by the coach. Rory was a little tied up this evening. Remember the website, it is ngscsports.com, where you catch all of your current content. Check us out. We'll be back. We'll be back. Always plenty to talk about, folks. Have a good night.